Hi, this is Stephen, and this is Astro Indicator Update, and this is episode 43. So let's look and see what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at the U.S. chart briefly, and my intent is to summarize and maybe crystallize somewhat what is going on over this 2-year period from an astrological perspective. We're going to look at plutocratic plans, the media in crisis, and individual values tested. I think that's a summation of what's going on. 2 articles I want to recommend: a Charles Hughes Smith article, a Matt Taibbi article that's specifically on the crisis in the media. And then we'll look at our markets like we usually do. I did not list here, but we'll look at the gold stock indexes as well. So we've seen this chart a number of times. If you've been looking at my videos, this is the chart of the USA. Its birth chart is in the middle here. The transits as of a couple days ago are listed in the outer ring. And the main, most important aspect that is going on is that we have Pluto, that's right here, is opposite the USA natal Mercury, okay? In addition, Jupiter is opposite it as well, almost exact, 24, 25, 24 over here, 24 Cancer. Other things are going on, most definitely. We have Uranus is in conjunction with the ascendant, bringing about rebellion, revolution, extremes, but also extremes can be found just in this isolated aspect as well with Pluto. Pluto is symbolized by mostly a sense of crisis, a life and death situation. In addition, it can mean a power grab. So let's look at these things. So I've indicated here that this is the primary aspect I'm going to look at because increasingly, and this is just my opinion, to me, what is happening in the world, I think, has got some planning behind it. And to me, it's a power grab of some sort. Its origins are hard to define, but when you have a power grab and on a worldwide basis, you want to look where the power is located and what organizations seem to be, at control of the levers of power. And we have manipulation going on, I think. Both are related to Pluto. Those are just, subcategories, sub-definitions of a Pluto transit. But here we have it on a national scale and actually an international scale. Mercury, as I've mentioned before, represents a number of different things, but one that's at the top of the list deals with, on a national level, it deals with the media, education, communication, transportation, business transactions. But in this case, the media. And we're going to look into a Matt Taibbi article dealing with the crisis in the media, the extremism found, ideological extremism in the media. And this is just, again, a very classic combination of symbols when you're dealing with Pluto, Mercury transit on the national level. The second house, for everyone, deals with values. It's one of the more fundamental underlying meanings of the second house. And here we have all these transits going through the second house. So it kind of deals with money, but on a more generalized, abstract basis, it deals with values. Well, personally, I always found the term values one that's somewhat ambiguous. So just look at it as things that we individually think are important or socially, nationally think are important. Well, a forest is made up of individual trees, and I think everyone who's dealing with the pandemic or dealing with the economic situation has individual issues to deal with, and some of these issues center on what they think are important, what values they think are important in their lives. For example, individual liberty versus the message of behaving, acting in a certain way for the social good. Okay? Which is most important? That's a values question. Truth. What is true? What is deception? These are things that we really are facing, particularly in relation to the news, on a daily basis. We face it with, what we can say to our friends because they are getting their news from a different place. Truth versus deception. Accepting, what do we accept as truth? Real news versus gaslighting. That's kind of a subcategory, but, very frequently I think that is, what we're dealing with when we deal with the news. Freedom versus conformity. The pressure to conform to the changes that have come about in our world. Some states you're forced to wear a mask. Other places, 80% we're not forced to, but people are you have a choice. And 95% of the people, wear masks, it seems like. And they'd rather conform. They're not, maybe they don't question whether it's really has a benefit to their health. So anyway, these are the things that are going on right now in our country, and they are not going to go away. I think there's sort of an evolution that happens. There's a potential positive ending of some degree of reform, of uncovering some of the deceit, uncovering some of the illegality, the crimes that are taking place, sort of in the back room or in a power grab sort of fashion. So, but I can't guarantee that. And we're facing a situation where, the fabric of our society is really fraying and coming undone in many respects. And it's hard to define astrologically, how, what the outcome is going to be. The timeline, though, is pretty clear. It's particularly strong over the next year. Over the next 2 weeks, I actually see some positive developments, surfacing with Jupiter. I've gone into this before. Jupiter is not always a beneficial energy. Sometimes it can just exacerbate things. But that's more, the odds are that it will bring in some positivity. We have Venus on the ascendant here for, it's exact right now. So there may be something a little bit more harmonious, less violence, less rioting, etc. on the scene. And, we'll accept that. We'll gladly accept that. So anyway, let's look at some articles that deal with this. And I won't go into them in detail. Video gets too long, but they're related to these things. The first one is from Charles Hughes Smith of twominds.com. You can look him up, but this is one of his recent articles. And the nice thing about Charles is he writes clearly, succinctly. And in this article, he's basically saying, when it comes to our economy and the markets, a great majority of what's happening is just simply financial engineering. We've sort of abandoned the idea of concentrating on producing real goods and services, and so much of what the market is composed of deals with stock buybacks or kind of scamming the system. Read the article. I won't go into it in a lot of detail. Personally, I don't like to read off my screen. For some reason, I find it difficult, so I'll let you read this. But this is market manipulation. We have a Potemkin village market, which means it's a facade, it's an illusion, it's not real. Matt Taibbi's article, Matt used to write for Rolling Stone. he would fall into being, I think, more traditional liberal, but kind of a moderate one. Here, this was a sort of a courageous article for him to write because he is calling out other media outlets, the New York Times, a number of them, the Intercept, he lists them here, and to what degree they are demanding their staff walk the line and conform to a certain ideology, and that ideology is paramount to actually reporting the news as objectively and truthfully. It overrides that, and some people are getting fired because they are not displaying or presenting themselves in a way that is aligned with what Taibbi thinks is an extremist position. And read the article. Maybe I'll try to read it here. I don't have the greatest eyesight. They've conned organization after organization into empowering panels to search out thought crime. And it's established now that anything can be an offense. From a UCLA professor under investigation for reading Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail out loud to a scientist fired from a research firm for, get this, retweeting an academic study suggesting nonviolent protests may be more politically effective than violent ones. Now this madness is coming for journalism. Beginning on Friday, June 5th, a series of controversies rocked the media. By my count, at least 8 news organizations dealt with internal uprisings. It was likely more. Most involved groups of reporters and staffers demanding the firing or reprimand of colleagues who'd made politically problematic, politically incorrect, I think is what he's suggesting, editorial or social media decisions. And so this is just, a blatant example of sort of an extreme position being taken by our media. And this is coming from someone, who's worked on, let's say, the left all his life, but compared to these people, he is definitely much more moderate. And in this article, he defends a journalist who got fired, someone by the name of Li Fang. And just in doing so, in defending Li Fang, Matt Taibbi is taking his own risk here because he could be labeled and called out as someone who is not, conforming to this ideology. So I tip my hat. My hat is off to Matt Taibbi here. And this is typical. My point here is this shows up in the astrology very clearly. So let's go on. Let's look at some charts. Okay, Dow Jones Industrials. Dow Jones Industrials took a big dive here a few days ago, somewhat close to a key astrological date. My key dates are the vertical lines. The other things you see in this chart are just traditional technical analysis, from momentum indicators to trend lines, moving averages, and so forth. So the vertical lines are specific astrological dates for this market. We had one, was the day off of a turning point. We came right down to this trend line that I have had drawn in for a long time. I highlight it in green. It's critical support area. We do have somewhat of a semi-strong astrological date coming up. It is on the 17th. But it is not the strongest one in the world. It may, I think the political interests, the plutocracy interests are to keep this market moving up and higher, okay? But the astrology's got a big blank spot here of nothing to support it. We were definitely overbought. It's come down to a kind of a neutral area, but we're looking like a crossover down here in the MACD, all suggesting possibly further downside. Watch this level. There's no reason fundamentally for the market to be this high. If it stays up, it's pure financial engineering, as Charles Hughes Smith was talking about in that article. Okay, watch this line. The astrology does not support higher prices here. Gold. For many weeks, I've been saying gold could trade sideways until we get into July. It's still June. As with actually the Dow, we're going through a dry spell of astrological energy that could support higher prices. So actually, the gold has been surprisingly buoyant, let's put it that way, and is testing highs right now. It seems to be bouncing and maintaining some momentum off of this astrological date, going back to June 8th. Let me look at my notes here. Let's see. And upcoming, we don't really have much upcoming until June 30th. Okay, you can see it down here. And it also, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if we trailed off, came down to support again, and then started bouncing on June 30th. July, getting into July 9th, July 13th, 14th, mid-July, much more bullish energy is evident. So play the technicals when you don't have an astrological date approaching or at hand. Play the technicals if you're trading this market. This looks like a channel just trading sideways to me if I was going to describe the pattern. And I'm saying that now because it's in contrast to what's going on in the gold stock indexes, which we'll look at now. So the gold stock index, this is the GDX, the larger gold miners, the majors as they usually call it. This kind of looks like a head and shoulders to me. Shoulder, head, shoulder, that we've possibly broken down on. And resting at a 50-day moving average. We have support right under it. The only positive here, if you're trading this market, is that we are, the MACD has come down quite a bit. RSI has come down quite a bit. The gold market is staying relatively strong, trading sideways, as we noted. So we'll have to see. But this is a volatile market, and this is my point. If the Dow Jones, which I don't think it will, but if the Dow Jones decides to break through its support, head lower, the markets start, declining noticeably, people will take profits here, and they may have started taking profits already. So if you want to preserve your profits, you could, protect yourself with stops and so forth. But this kind of looks like a head and shoulders, which usually points to at least the market drifting lower for a while. Here is the junior gold markets, gold mining stocks. The head and shoulders is not as defined, but we have broken down underneath what I have drawn in here as a channel line. We have another important line in green as a support area. 50-day moving average is not too far off. At best, I think we're going to trade sideways until end of the month or July. So, keep that in mind. Okay, here's the silver market. We have kind of an expanding wedge going on. We do have some astrological astrological days approaching. But if we break below that green line, we may see a drop. And so in silver, on the 20th, which is where I have 19th, 20th, where I have my cursor, sort of a grade B bullish date. We should see something respond there. But then we have a stretch of time where we get into July, just like the gold market. So this market, at best, I think is going to trade sideways, and we could get some sharp down days. I think people are going to buy it. If you're not in this market, look for those sharp drops and see them as buying opportunities, possibly. This isn't financial advice, but that's how I would play it personally. So let's move on. Here's Bitcoin. Bitcoin is kind of forming its own odd pattern. Other people would draw it. It seems like it's a horizontal wedge triangle that's failed a couple times. This is what I'm talking about here. We're right at the 50-day moving average. We don't really have some, strong astrology for a while. The date on June 10th was a reversal date, and that was a reversal date. Can you see my cursor? We hit a high. I mean, clearly these symbols in astrology usually indicate a change in direction. We will see at this point whether all this support underneath this market is going to hold. If it does, I think we'll trade sideways up to June 30th. June 30th, we do get into, that's usually quite a bullish indicator. And like gold, when we get well into July, there are much more stronger astrological energies in play. So, we've kind of come up to this resistance level, particularly right there. We need to build more of a foundation before we go higher. That's sort of just a technical talk. But like gold, with the amount of money that they're just creating, Bitcoin as a store of value is, in my book, a good one. So this, if you get a pullback here, you might want to add to your positions. And I've continually used Ethereum now for a while because I think it interacts with the Bitcoin market. Let me look at my notes, see specifically what's going on with Ethereum. And so Ethereum actually has, it's got a stretch of time right here on June 13th. Fairly strong energy, which actually makes this channel line that much more important because we should get a bounce here. We really should. We'll see what happens. I think these charts were made on Saturday or Friday. So we should get a bounce. We'll see if that supports Bitcoin. When we come out to June 23rd, much stronger energy is out here. So, obviously this resistance level has been formidable and we haven't gotten through that area. We may not get through that area until further into June. Finally, the US dollar, which is very important because it's an intermarket, it has so many intermarket relationships. This market is weak, but it's oversold. It tells me it's weak because this last astrological date normally is a very strong, we should have gotten a bounce, in other words, but we have just been trailing down all the way down to a very obvious support zone. I should have drawn this line in green. And now we're getting a bounce, which is just a technical bounce. There was no astrology there. The technical traders could see that was a support. They started buying it. And the thing is that, we may just kind of crawl off the bottom here in the dollar. And the next two dates are typical high volatility days. So it wouldn't surprise me if we come up to June 17th and we come right back down, okay? Because we missed the opportunity back here a week ago to bounce a big way, and it just didn't happen, which was very telling that this market is weaker than I thought it was, and it could really be heading south. And essentially just responding to how much currency, money is, flooding into the system. So anyway, that's it for this week. I'm Stephen. I've been studying financial astrology for 25 years. I have a master's in psychology. In this day and age, I'm definitely an advocate for hard money and cryptocurrency. And so if you have a question, you can email me there. I accept Bitcoin donations. If you like this video, please hit like. Consider subscribing. On average, I do one of these usually every weekend. So if you want to get notified, follow the procedures for that. But thank you again for listening, and I'll probably talk to you in about a week.